Okay, guys, time for a little bit of a different video. A reminiscing video. Did I just do a rainbow? That was a unintentional rainbow. If you like unintentional rainbows, leave a like, silly comments, whatever, right? So, unfortunately, because I couldn't go to Japan this year, I'm very salty. But let's talk about something that whenever I have a deeper conversation about Japan, I always talk about what is the coolest, what is the part I love the most about Japan? What was the part I thought was the most interesting, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to give the cheating answer. My cheating answer is whenever I think about Japan, the most interesting thing about Japan to me was the contrast of Japan. And it's a cheating answer because it goes with everything, dude, right? And what do I mean by that? So I'm going to talk about why the contrast of Japan is the most interesting thing about Japan to me is because it encompasses like everything about Japan, right? Let's look at all the different ways we could talk about contrast in Japan. Let's talk about just how you can all live jam packed like sardines, such almost claustrophobic like, but you feel safe. I mean, that's crazy, right? I mean, normally you think when you're living so close together with everyone, if you're so close, you feel like uncomfortable with it. But Japan is incredible that you're so jam packed, but you feel safe. You don't feel in danger, right? That's kind of like a contrast to me, a contrasting aspect that I think is interesting, right? You think about all the different kinds of food in Japan, which I think culture, if you're talking about culture shock, the biggest culture shock for me I had was just how good convenience store food was. I could not believe how incredibly good convenience store food was. I couldn't believe how good cheap food was. And I guess it's just because, Japan has the highest collection of Michelin rated star restaurants in the world. So unless you serve good food, even if it's 7-Eleven, Lawson, whatever, you won't survive unless you serve good food, even if it's cheap, right? So anyway, but even, other things we're talking about contrast, what would be the contrast? How wherever you're going in Japan, like if you're it feels like you could be walking down one road to another road to just one room in a building to another room in a building, and it's always like you're in a different world, right? Despite being right next to each other, it always feels like you're in a different world, right? Just so quickly. I think that's really interesting, right? How they jam pack everything so like sardines, even like whatever kind of like could be this kind of restaurant compared to this kind of restaurant to you could be at an arcade to wait maybe there's a hair salon. So there's so many things. One just you're walking down one thing, you see one thing more right, one world one place, the next world another place. I mean, we're walking down one road, dude. Looks like a normal road. The next building right there, dude. And I told this story because it's so weird. You got like a massage parlor where a girl could be, she jacking you off, whatever she might be doing at the end of it. And then the next room to it too, they had a room where you put on 3D goggles because you don't want someone to do it, you want to do it yourself. I don't know. There's just so many. Japan jam packs so much shit into one place. I don't. Does that count as a contrast? I don't know. To me, it does. And then also talking about kind of that claustrophobic almost thing of this people being so jam packed. Despite everything being so jam packed, everything is so clean. Like that kind of contrasting element is really interesting to me too. Like, how do you jam pack so many different mindsets? Japan mindsets, right? I mean, let's use that in quotation marks, but how do you jam pack so many different vibes, we could say, but everything is still so clean, right? It seems like it should be. It seems like it shouldn't work that way, but it does work that way in Japan. Which I always said one of the saddest things I actually saw is whenever you would go to arcades in Japan, the one dirty place in Japan was always the fighting games, which is I always thought was really kind of sad and kind of like on a deeper psychological level because they have these. It's always the UFO crane catcher kind of games at the bottom of an arcade, which again goes with the contrast. One minute it's just the most pristine, clean UFO catcher game. The next like door or stairs up, all fighting games, whatever it might be, right? But when you would get there, although everything is so pristine and clean down there on the first floor, the fighting games was just smoke filled, dirty. It was like the only dirty bathrooms, one of the only dirty bathrooms I ever saw in my entire time in Japan. I never saw a squat toilet, never went on into the boonies or whatever it might be. But I guess maybe some people have seen them. I've never seen them, just you know what I mean? But I saw the bathrooms were not, crazy. I was not impressed with the arcades in that sense. I actually kind of felt kind of sad and made me kind of depressed actually, or down. Felt it was kind of disappointing when I saw that actually, but again, that's kind of a weird contrast for you, I guess. But other things when I think about contrast, I think about how Japan, when you're in like sort of like I guess you'd call it like the suburbs, you see how, and this is probably the deepest thing I'm gonna get at maybe, or after this, the suburbs and how peaceful and lovey-dovey people are. Like you see the families, they're almost like hip hop scotching, whatever it's called, holding hands, very innocent, lovey-dovey kind of thing. You know what I mean? Everyone seems so peaceful and happy. And then when you think about the contrast of that, there's just like such a quick little. All you need to do is take a quick 10 minutes wherever you're going potentially in Japan, right? It could just be a 10-minute train ride, and boom, it's the boom city life all over the place. But take a 10-minute ride here, so peaceful and innocent and everything like that. You see such a difference between people in such a short amount of time, right? The city life compared to suburb life. I guess city life compared to suburb life is different in America too. But really, when you see, that level of like, I guess, kindergartners, whatever they are, middle schoolers, not so much, but you just see they're so peaceful. It's like something like out of an American movie. You know what I mean? That's how happy people look. And also, the deeper level of this, the contrast that is really interesting, I think, is, and my friend described it as like Japan has a really big Peter Pan syndrome, right? And that's because in Japan, really, when you even think about anime and manga, it's always about the middle schoolers or just the high school people. Because once you leave high school, your life is over, right? You got to enter that work grind to where potentially, life is over. You're going to be working for the rest of your life, right? But it's really interesting if you ever get to go to Japan and you actually really get to see. And if you're lucky enough that you can have someone that is like, they'll just tell you exactly how things are. They've lived there for a while. They can show you the nitty gritty. They can show you regular stuff, whatever it might be. But when you go to suburbs and you can see how happy every people are, even when you get off the trains or you're going to a train station, you can see kids and like teenagers coming from the train after school, whatever it might be, and they look so happy. People look still happy. They still have life. But you see this age group where people are no longer happy in Japan. I mean, of course, you might be going, if you're out in the city, people are drunk, they're getting fucked, whatever you're doing, right? Whatever you're doing, of course, they're happy there. But really, it's that kind of level when you see the different aspects, the age groups in Japan, really on the train, I think, is the contrast is really interesting because you still see there's still life in people. They're still happy. But they reach that age demographic where they're like, wow, my life is about to be over. All I'm going to do is work for the rest of my life. And it's like you can see it in their face. Even the short amount of time, the couple of times that I've been to Japan, you could see it. It's really, really interesting, right? And even again, kind of talking about that as well, you're talking about like the family aspect of, if you've ever seen, they have these like documentaries about Japan about kind of like loveless marriages or whatever it might be. Maybe loveless marriage isn't the correct way to think about it, but you think about there's sort of this, I kind of think about Japan as like kind of like an unspoken sadness, right? Kind of like you just let it go as long as you don't rub it in the person's face, right? You could see families, they're so lovey-dovey, but because Japan is so, compacted and everything like that, there's not always a lot of place to have sex, right? So because there's no place to have sex, it's like the wife just kind of accepts. And you've seen documentary, if you've looked about Japan too, and seen it for real life, you can see that it is like that too. Like, oh, well, sometimes the wife knows that the husband, you're working all these hours, he might go fuck some girls, right? And before he comes home, because that's what happens, right? He might go bang and like, hey, I'm working all day. There's no place for us to have sex when I get home. Well, we might be still living with our parents, or we might have kids, and the kid might be in our own room. We're also jam packed together. We don't want to be like boom, 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 boom. Take me now, daddy. You know what I mean? Whatever, the neighbors are gonna hear us because we're so jam packed. So it's kind of like a thing. It's like, yeah, my husband might, when he's off of work, when he's in the city, he might be boom, boom, banging these girls at these love hotels, because that's the only time where you actually get to have sex, because it's harder to have sex at your own home. And if you actually, and my friend was explaining it basically, that a conundrum of it too is, that if, well, my friend was saying, not a lot of people in Japan are having sex because it's kind of like the conundrum of, if you have the money to be going to a love hotel to be banging people regularly, you probably could have bought a better apartment or a better house in the first place to have room to have sex, to not bother the neighbors anyway, right? So it's kind of like a conundrum, right? So I guess that's like another reason why people aren't having a lot of sex in Japan, because again, there's no place to have sex. And of course, there's places to have sex, kind of like gray areas, right? But what you're supposed to do, right? That's why love hotels are so popular, because you can actually have sex there. But if you can have sex regularly, that you could be paying to do it there all the time, you probably could have just bought a better place in the first place. So it's like kind of like a conundrum, I guess, right? A weird does that count as a contrast? I think it's interesting. It's interesting to me. I thought it was interesting, dude. So, but yeah, really, if you ever get to go to Japan, maybe you will. Hopefully, I get to go again. I'd like to stay longer. For sure, think about the word contrast while you're there, right? And that's not to say there's nothing bad about Japan or anything like that, but the contrast, whenever I was in Japan and I thought about it, and even I think about it now, is just really fascinating, right? Anyway, that's what I love. One of these crazy videos, like, what do you love the most about Japan? What I love, I did the rainbow at the beginning, dude. Should I like flex while I do it or something? The rainbow at the beginning, dude. But unintentional rainbow. Unintentional rainbow, dude. But yeah, that's the thing I thought was the most interesting about Japan, I guess.